Hello again, this is Mike with Toy Train Tips and Tricks, and in this episode we are going to change the look of our tubular track from this to this to this to this to this. So let's get started. We are looking at our Tinplate track, and we're going to do some rather simple, rather inexpensive things to make the track look a little bit more realistic. And we're going to start by adding some paint. And so the first thing I'm going to do, and this is a trick that modelers have been doing, probably since at least the 1940s, if not earlier, is we're going to take this center rail, which we all know is not prototypical. It, doesn't exist in the real world. And we're going to try to make it at least a little bit less noticeable. By painting it black, to the brain anyway, it tends to make it disappear into the background. So we're going to start by painting this center rail black, and I'm just going to use some ultra cheap craft paints. It doesn't have to be the best stuff, and you can see here remnants of a piece that I painted probably 20 some years ago. So I'm going to touch this up while we're at it. You don't have to paint all of the rail, just the parts that are going to be seen by visitors. In this case, this side of the track is not going to be visible from the other side of the layout once my scenery's in, so I'm only going to paint this side of my rails. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to take an old rag and I'm just going to wipe things down just to make sure, get the dust off, any grease and grime and oil or smoke fluid or anything else that's accumulated on the track. I'm going to wipe that off to help our paint stick just a little bit better. So I'm just going to take that and my old container, squirt some in there. I can work with my brush, and we're ready to roll. Take a small paintbrush. Now, if you think you're going to be super sloppy, you can mask off, but I'm just going to do this freehand. And don't worry about getting some on the top. We will wipe that off before it dries. If you get a little bit on the ties, that's okay. I'm being a little sloppy here. And you see, this is one of the reasons why I don't use typical lock-ons on my track, because they don't work well with the paint. And now I'm going to come back with a damp rag and wipe off just the very top of the rail, the part where the contacts, the rollers will make contact for electrical purposes, and also get anything where I got it where it didn't belong. And I'll let that dry and see what we've got. For many folks, this would be enough, just having that black center rail. I'm going to go the next step, and I'm going to paint my outside rails somewhat of a rust color. Now, there's no one particular shade that would be, prototypical for rails. A lot of it depends on the area that you're going through and also how new the rails are. So really anywhere between, a real oxide orangish rust color all the way down to kind of a light gray, and anywhere in between is where you'll find prototypical rails. So I'm going to try to mix up a color in that orangish brownish range, and I'm going to do this by trial and error, just mixing the paint colors together in my cup and seeing what I come up with. There's no particular formula for this. A couple of squirts of stuff and see what you get. I'm going to green it down a little bit. That's probably going to make it more brown. And let's swirl that together and see what we got. Oh yeah, that's baby diaper brown. Yummy. A little bit better. Let's darken it a little bit. Darken it up just a little bit. Give it a shot of black. I think I went too far. I'm too green. So let's bring it back to the rust. And again, trial and error until you get the color you want. That's kind of a earth brown. I'd like to orange that up a little bit more to give it a rustier feel. Yeah, that's kind of a rail brown right there, I would think. Yeah, I think that's pretty close. Let's try to red it up a little bit more to give it some of that oxide feel. Oh, that's a brand new one. Give it just a shot of red. Ah, yeah. I think that's going to do. And of course, If you end up with a color you don't like, you can always come back and repaint. Again, you can mask this off. Here, let me cover up the old. Woo. Oh, and I got some on my black. I'm a little sloppy today. I'll have to come back and touch up my black there. And if you get a little bit of variation of color, that's okay. The real thing is not consistent either. I'm getting some on the ties, but that's okay. That's why I'm doing this at this point before I add my additional ties. There we go. I'm going to let it there, and now I'll come back with my wet rag and hit the tops of the rails. Just wipe along the spot where I missed. And so there we are. We are going to let this dry overnight. You know, I like to do small areas. You get a little bit of variation in the rails from different parts of the layout, and that's okay because that happens on the real thing as well. And again, for a lot of folks, this would be enough, but I'll show you my next step when we come back tomorrow. Okay, so we're back and the paint has dried to a nice flat finish. And again, for many folks, this would be enough. You've got the black rail, you've got the rusty sides, looks nice. I'm going to go to the next step though, and I'm going to address this gap between the ties. And we're going to fill in with some additional ties. Now, there's a couple of different ways you can go. One is to head to your local craft store, your Michael's, Hobby Lobby, what have you, and find these basswood or balsa wood. These are 1/4 inch by 1/8 inch. Ideally, we could find 3/8 by half, but I find that that's not a very common size for those stores to have in stock. I don't know, maybe try online to work with that. And so you take these, you cut them to length, just use an O27 tie as your guide. Crank these out, cut them out, and then I tried staining them, but these don't take stain very well, so paint was the way to go. So I took them and painted them, and you can crank out a batch of these. You can cut, a dozen of these in 30 seconds to a minute, and then painting them over, and then let them dry overnight, and you've got dozens and dozens of these that you can use. To overcome the fact that they are a little taller, you just loosen your track a little bit, slide them underneath, screw it down. It does help a little bit as a sound dampener. By screwing it down tightly to these, it eliminates some of the vibration in the track if that's a problem for you. But that's one option. Also in wood ties, you can go the commercial route. There's a gentleman on eBay who sells these pre-cut. These, I believe, are cedar, and they're pre-stained as well, pre-cut, pre-stained. And these are about an 1/8 inch high, which again is a little shorter than your typical O27 tie. But if your track's already screwed down, you just slide it underneath and it's close enough to give the visual appeal. And you can just hold that in place with just a little dab of some Elmer's wood glue, just enough to keep it, or wood glue, or actually the white school glue works really great. And just enough to keep it from sliding back and forth. Also in the commercial route, if you can still find them, there were companies that used to make these commercially. There were plastic ones by a company called 3R Plastics. Those are great. There were rubber ties made by a company called Moondog. If you can find those are great, especially for sound dampening. Or there's the 3D printed route. If you go to Thingiverse, and you can see the link in the description, there's this nifty tie. The upsides of it does have some wood grain detail on it, and some tie plates. Now these little clips on the side are a little fragile. They do like to pop off, but it's kind of a nice little detailed tie. Doesn't have a spot for the center rail, but I've used these before, and these are okay. And then there's another design that I just came up with, and I like this better, even though the look of the tie itself isn't as prototypical. What I designed these for is these will just snap right into the track, and there's a slot for the third rail. And no need for glue. These things, once they're snapped on there, they're good and solid. They're not as detailed, but they're faster to print. They clip on with a third rail. They do work with curves as well as straights. And these I intend to use primarily for creation of insulated track sections, because I can print these out and they'll grip onto the rails and actually replace the metal ties on these. The disadvantage to the 3D printed is, even if you're doing a large batch, you're talking 20 to 30 minutes per tie to print them out. So, I mean, you can do a large batch overnight, but it can get really tedious time-wise waiting for these to come out. So I recommend using these for very specific small locations and using one of the wood options for bigger areas. And I'm actually going to be using these today. These are recycled from my previous layout. Again, I just put them down with some wood glue and pop them off with a scraper. And you can see on some of these, you see some of the, there we go, some of the paint from the previous layout where it was glued down. But just pop it off with a scraper and we're ready to go. So let's lay some ties. So here we go. I'm going to slide 2 of these between each of my metal ties. Now, if I were stopping here, I would go ahead and add some glue to these. And again, either the Elmer's school glue type, or even take a craft glue stick and just rub on there, stick it down, and that's enough to keep it from sliding around. If you don't do that, then the vibration of the trains coming by, it won't take long for these things to slide all over the place. But I'm going to handle the glue in the next step that I'm going to do. And you see it doesn't take long to crank out a whole section of track. When you come to an impediment like wires underneath the rails, just take and you can cut off a smaller section of the tie and slip under each side. And so you still have the look. I would put this in, cut it off, and then do the same thing on the other side, which I'll do here in a moment. I'm back. I'm just going to cut it real quick, that edge a little bit, and slide it under. So now I have my ties in place, and if I were just stopping there, which is fine, I would have glued these in place as I put them down, and we would be ready to roll. But I'm not done yet. I'm going to add one more step here. I'm going to add some ballast. Now, different modelers use different things for ballast. There's the commercially available versions. This is by Woodland Scenics. Some folks use other things like aquarium gravel or lizard gravel or chicken grit, crushed oyster shells, and I've looked into some of those and I just haven't liked the look. Another thing that some folks use, and this one I do like the look of, but I've just found it hard to find a supplier, and that is roofing gravel, which comes in lots of different colors. It's the right size, it's the right consistency, but it's hard to find a supply without having to buy huge bulk quantities of it. I did find someone selling it actually as railroad ballast on eBay, but as you would imagine, shipping was a little expensive because the cost of shipping rocks. So in this case, what you might find at your local hobby shop might be your better choice. So this is Woodland Scenics. I like the coarse. It comes in fine and medium, lots of different colors. This is the coarse gray blend, number B1395. And we're going to get into this. So a lot of folks are kind of intimidated by this step. And honestly, you really can't mess it up. You can always go back and redo it if you don't like the results. As a matter of fact, if you look, my track is a little dusty because this is actually my second attempt. I tried using one of those other products first, the crushed oyster shells, and it worked, but I really wasn't happy with the look. So I vacuumed it all up. And this is attempt number 2. We're just going with the commercial product this time. And so a little bit goes a long way. I'm going to use this. And for my first step, I'm using a dry paintbrush. We are just going to pour it into the cap. And I'm going to start. Oh, by the way, if you have any holes for wires under the track, plug those up first. I threw some duct tape underneath my electrical holes here. Otherwise, you're pouring your fresh ballast into a hole and onto your floor. So I'm going to start by just pouring a little bit here in between the tracks. in between the rails, and then I'm going to brush that with my dry brush and spread it out just to get it to the top of the ties. And you see it spreads out a long way. I just want to get it even with the top of my ties, kind of fill in the space between the ties. It doesn't take a lot, just a little bit goes a long way. Depending on what era you are looking to model or how neat you want your ballast to be, you might consider putting down a row of masking tape on either side of the ties. That way, when everything is dry, you can just simply pull up the tape and you have a nice straight edge. If you look at photos from, say, the 1940s, 1950s, when track and ballast was largely laid by hand, the track crews, the maintenance crews, really took pride in their jobs, and you often see, perfectly straight lines of ballast on the sides. By the time you get to the late 1960s, the 70s, and later, one, it was more mechanized. Two, in the 70s especially, most of the railroads didn't have a lot of budget for maintenance, and so it became, you just throw the ballast on there, whatever it looks like, whatever's good. So I'm focusing more on the 1970s era, so my ballast is not going to have a perfectly straight edge. Now, if the ballast isn't behaving, and actually this is behaving itself quite well, but sometimes you have to worry about a slope and such, and to get the rocks to stay put, what we use for that, just get yourself a misting spray bottle and use what we call wet water. And it's essentially just water with just a little bit of liquid detergent, dishwashing liquid added, just to help break the surface tension. And so if the ballast is causing you problems, just give it, some very light misting spray, and that'll help hold it in place. But really, this is behaving itself well without it, so I'm not really having to spray this down at all. So I'm pretty well done here with the middle. I just want to make sure, go back and just make sure that I get as many of the pieces of gravel off the top of the ties, and also make sure that the flangeway is clear so I don't have any problems with any axles and causing derailments. But this is looking pretty good. Okay, so I'm happy with what's going on between the rails. Now I'm going to add some to the outside, and again, a little bit goes a very long way. But I'm going to add a little, I'd say maybe 1/2 inch, 3/4 inch at most to either side. Okay, the sides I'm going to spray down a little bit just to help keep everything from walking away on me. And then once again, I'm just going to take this screwdriver and get these stray pieces off the side of the rail. It's not going to interfere with operation, but just aesthetically. Double check the same thing with the center rail and the back rail. Okay, so now I have a mixture of glue, water, and just a little bit of our detergent, again, our wet water. 50-50 solution of water and craft glue. Usually the white glue works great. I got this clear stuff on clearance, and it works just as well. So I'm using that. It's the same stuff, only clear instead of white. And an eyedropper. And I am just going to take this solution and I am going to soak it good. And we want everything to soak in. So just soak it, soak it. I might need a little bit more water. Okay, so we want to soak this in Let it go everywhere. And this will also help hold those ties in place, any of them that were getting loose. You really can't do too much. While it's drying, you can go back and clean up any wayward pieces that went where they shouldn't oughta. And if you're using a brush for this, clean the brush immediately so the glue doesn't gum up your bristles. And again, I'm going to check the tops of my ties. And any other wayward pieces of ballast before it dries. Okay, and now obviously with all of the glue and such, this is a last step. You want to make sure all of your electrical is taken care of before you do this. But this is a good way to make your O27 tubular track look more realistic. And so you ask, well, why not just buy the modern track that already has the ballast built in? Well, you can do that. And, you know, it is more expensive. And when I consider one, I already have gobs and gobs of the O27 track. The other consideration is lots of my layout. Lots of times the track is going to be covered by, you know, tunnels and such. And so why pay the extra for the pre-ballasted track when most of it is going to be hidden anyway? So if I save this just for the areas that, you know, are visible, it becomes more economical. And honestly, I do think this looks better. You may disagree, but I think this looks better in the end than the plastic ballasted track. Okay, and now all the glue has dried, and so we can take a damp cloth, wipe the top of the rails, and that should be enough to get the glue off. You also may want to come back and vacuum up any loose spots, but this is all glued down very, very well. I don't really see any loose spots here, so I'm going to skip that step. So we are ready for trains. So as always, I hope you liked the video. If so, please like it, share it, subscribe, leave a comment, tell your friends, tell your neighbors, and keep those trains running, and we'll catch you next time on Toy Train Tips and Tricks.